Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 12th episode of Conceptualism. I have with me here today April Hubbard, who is a arts advocate, a circus performing artist, and is the chair of the Halifax Fringe Festival. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess I want to start by asking you about your journey into the world of arts and and what inspired you to to be an arts advocate and also a practicing artist.
I kind of fell into the world of arts. I was much more science based as a kid.
Uh-huh.
And my mother, who's an accountant, was working at an accounting firm where the owner was really involved in the local art scene and needed a script prompter one day. So they asked my mother, "You have daughters, don't you? One of them would be available." And I went to my first rehearsal that night as a script prompter and fell in love. And by the end of that show, I was stage managing. And from then on, I was bit by the theater bug. And yeah, just couldn't get away from it after that.
That's amazing. That's so amazing. Um, I definitely relate to that. Like where like I was also really interested in science and like when the first thing that I remember wanting to do was to be a pilot. You know, like that. Like I never thought about myself as having a career in the arts or music. I wanted to be an engineer, an astrophysicist, a pilot, and then I realized actually like music has always been my first love. I haven't really yeah, it's always been there and it's always been there for me, but it's like, sometimes when you're hanging out with your best friend, you don't realize they're your best friend until like way later,
Yeah,
and it's like so
yeah,
so yeah, I mean that's really interesting that you came from a science background, and it probably informs your artistic practice, I would assume, your
yeah,
curiosity
definitely.
and your science brain.
Yeah, definitely. I think the most interesting artists I've met are just people who love studying the world, and that
Yes.
comes from a science background. So,
Yes.
yeah, there's so many different ways to approach it, but I really love people who can look at it from a creative and an analytical perspective.
Right. So basically Renaissance people that
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
like as chair of the Fringe Festival, I guess you're like could you maybe like tell me about that role and what that involves and like and yeah, and how that looks.
Yeah, well, I again didn't approach this trying to become the chair of the Halifax Fringe Festival.
You were a volunteer, weren't you?
I was. I started out volunteering in 2003
Uh-huh.
and mostly selling tickets and welcoming folks at the door.
Right.
And just really loved that side of it, that interaction and getting to know people through theater and through Fringe. And after a few years, there was an event where the organizer had to take some time off and the community just kind of came together and we said we need to make Halifax Fringe continue to happen and it's an important part of our culture. So that year I volunteered to write a grant to get some money to make it happen. And again, some of my more scientific and analytical background coming in. And after that, they invited me to be part of the board. Um, and yeah, I just became more and more involved behind the scenes in the running of it and basically just out of a passion of needing to make it happen and appreciating how important that experimental type of theater is in Halifax. So needing to have a place for that where people can create in whatever way they want without limitations. Um,
That's so wonderful.
yeah,
That's
and
incredible.
yeah, it's out of pure greed on my part that I want to see that happen. So I needed to be part of the committee that makes sure it happens every year. Yeah, and
Definitely.
I was lucky enough about I guess it would be 5 years ago now that they invited me to be the first female chair of the Halifax Fringe Festival.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah,
That's amazing. And you know, you said you're it's kind of like a greed thing, but it's probably also like altruistic because, like, I mean, you're creating a space for artists, you know, to do this kind of work, and like, I mean, in that way, it's incredibly giving, and it's like, and it's like, you know, it's definitely a community art practice, like, you know, in that sense.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of community there, and I've seen so many people in my own years that started out kind of in the volunteering in the nervous stage of, do I belong in this space, and walking in as the young newbie artists and seeing where their careers have gone, and to be able to watch that and know that I had some little role in making that happen is really really special. So, and just seeing the whole networking aspect that happens at the Fringe has always been something that's really exciting to me. To see different styles of artists connecting and having an opportunity to create new projects and talk in new ways that they probably never would have otherwise outside of the Halifax Fringe.
That's amazing. That's beautiful. And you you also like are an advocate, and you know, you're pushing for inclusion for, you know, for people who you know, are differently abled, who have, you know, who have, you know, certain limitations you know, that other arts festivals may not take into consideration.
Yeah, and for me, that came really naturally as well. I am a woman with a disability. I'm a wheelchair user myself. I have chronic pain and several other invisible disabilities. So
Yes.
for me, it wasn't so much wanting to make the Halifax Fringe more accessible, is I want to be able to get into these spaces. I want to be able to invite my friends to these spaces. Um, and I want everybody to have a space there, not only where they can be and experience the art, but where they can be the artists as well and be on
Right.
stage. So it was, yeah, just it came very naturally to want to speak up when I saw that, well, this isn't happening in the right way, and why are we excluding these people? And oh, we overlooked that side of it, and to be able to point out the things that we're missing and make sure everybody has a chance to get into the room and really be a part of the conversation that drives our community forward, because that's really what art does. It
Yes.
gives us a chance to look at our community and criticize what we're doing incorrectly, and really shape where we want to go and what we want our society to look like. So to be able to have a part in that has been really really special, and it just evolved very naturally from speaking out when I saw something that I didn't think worked, and wanting to do it differently when I had the say and I had the power to control it.
Well, and you know, I mean, I actually have a really close family friend who suffers from MS, but you know, but is an incredible poet, and has, you know, and it loves everything in the arts, you know, from theater to dance and everything. And so it's interesting that you know, that he doesn't look at himself as somebody with a disability. He just sees it as like, you know, as this is part of my life. Like, it's like, you know, like for some people, people take for granted, for example, the sun shining every day. So like he sees the that is just being part of his life. He doesn't see it as a limitation. and and
Yeah. And
and
for me, I
that,
see it a little differently again, and everybody with a disability sees it in a different way.
right, because
I noticed
it's like everybody has their perspective, and it's quite nuanced, you know, because everybody
exactly.
deals with it differently. Everybody's body is different.
Yeah, I noticed you said too suffers from that MS. And for me, that's the way that I feel society sees me in a lot of ways, that I'm suffering with my disability. But for me, it's really something, it's become something to be celebrated.
Hmm.
There have been really difficult moments, and it's brought a lot of pain into my life, and a lot of times where I've had to reimagine who I was because of that. But it's also brought so many amazing opportunities that I never would have had otherwise,
Right.
and allowed me to see the world in a very different way. So I want to embrace and celebrate both sides of that, and celebrate my disability, rather than have it being seen as a tragedy all the time.
Right.
Um,
Or even a
yeah, I run.
detriment, or even a detriment, because like,
Yeah,
like if you suffer from mental illness, and as I suffer from mental illness, people will say, oh, this is, I feel sorry for you, or it, oh, this must, really be horrible. And I'm like, you know what, I wouldn't be the same person without it. So this, you're right, it is something to celebrate. Yeah, it has challenges, but you have to celebrate it as well, because it's yeah. So I think I'm really glad you called me on that, for saying that he suffers from MS, because that you're right. Like it's not just suffering, it's also a celebration, or it should be anyway,
Mhm.
of
Yeah,
life, and all the different, because yeah, the world would be so dull if everybody was just, normal, quote unquote,
yeah, it really would. Yeah, and it brings so many interesting shades and views and perspectives into the world to be able to celebrate all those different sides of us. Yeah, and so many different intersectionalities within the community of disability as well. There's so many different disabilities and diagnoses as it
yes,
is. But there's also, I mean, such a cross section. I live in the arts community, and specifically in disability and LGBTQ communities. There's a huge cross section there.
yes,
But in all different, there's so many different communities that really cross over into the world of disability and have their own unique identities that really need to be celebrated and brought into our everyday culture even more.
a
Yeah,
hundred
I
percent,
had
a
an
hundred percent
amazing
agree. And
yeah, I had
like,
an amazing opportunity last year where I started a disability storytelling event called Disability X Halifax. And it was this amazing opportunity to get everybody with all these different disabilities together in one room and to really control their own narrative about how they felt about their disability and what they had to say. And it was such a special, unique opportunity for us to build each other up and recognize our commonalities rather than our differences. And it was
that's
a really
beautiful.
special night. I'm looking forward to being able to do it again when we can.
That's amazing. And also, like, speaking of, of being part of the LGBTQ community, like, like your pronouns, like people's pronouns are so important, and like, and other parts of their identity which are not normally, like, being misgendered is such, like, it's a, it's so horribly annoying, like, when people
Mm-hmm.
assume that you're a certain gender because you present a certain way.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many different tie-ins there, whether it's being misgendered, whether it's assumptions about your race, that
Yes,
there's common experiences there within that and the disability community too. And I think there's a real disservice in our community that we're kind of divided into these differences rather than really celebrating our common experiences and sitting down and having those conversations about, well, how does that affect you and how is it similar and different to my experience?
yeah,
And just getting to have those open dialogues about what it's like to live in the bodies we're in, and how different people will read us that way, and how it can be both a positive and negative again, and how we can hold each other up in that experience as well.
right. And creating, although this is a very, overused word, but creating safe spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean for different people? Because it does mean
Yes,
different things to
exactly.
different people.
Certainly. Yeah. Yeah, and it's an ongoing challenge to keep reinventing what that's going to mean as well, for a given organization or a given person, to just create the safest space we possibly can, and always looking at, well, who is missing from this room and what
Mm.
voices aren't being heard and why aren't they present and why aren't they being heard. Yeah, it's something that has been a challenge for me personally over the last few years, but I also really like to challenge other individuals to really ask those questions as well, and be
Definitely.
honest with themselves about who is missing.
And that kind of research, or that kind of, investigation is so important. And I
Certainly.
think it actually needs to be taken on by institutions, whether it's universities, whether it's government organizations. Like, people need to really critically look at who is being represented, where the power is held, and it's hard because the people that have power don't want to distribute it. They don't want to let go. And so I think it's a messy and complicated process, but so important. That work is so important.
And it's also difficult for any individual to take responsibility for their role in it as well,
Hmm.
whether it's a conscious choice they made or just systemic issues that they didn't recognize or didn't stop. That a lot of people, their defenses go up for that. So yeah, it's a very vulnerable position to put yourself in, to be honest about um, yeah, how you've treated other human beings and how you've maintained your own power and what's that done to other people in the room as well. So yeah, it's important conversations that need to keep happening though.
I want to ask you about theater of the absurd and what your thoughts are about that whole movement.
um I haven't really thought that much about theater of the absurd for many years. I mean, it's definitely something I studied back in theater school.
Yeah.
But for me, I don't necessarily think about theater in different genres or experiences anymore. For me, it's just I like to go into the room and see what's going to happen and not have any preconceived notions about what it's going to be. And that's the most exciting thing for me.
I
And I
love
think
that.
that's why, yeah, that's why I'm so drawn to Fringe as well, is because you can have a piece of Shakespearean theater next to a circus act, next to a puppet show for kids, next to the most absurd thing that you don't even know what to call it.
Oh, I
So
love that.
yeah, for me,
Because
it's more so.
these are the juxtapositions that really allow us to look critically and and philosophically at the human condition.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, one of the most touching pieces I've seen in recent years was a Théâtre du Poulet show, um, which spoke about immigration and very deep, heavy issues. But it was done completely with the set was made out of cardboard, and the actors were all potatoes and puppets. So yeah, and it's like you would think, how can you tell that story properly that way? But it allowed it to be more approachable, and it wasn't as scary of an issue for people to come into and listen to when it was potatoes telling the story.
Well,
So yes.
that's incredible because like when you think about it, that issue of accessibility and like making it palatable for people, so
Mhm.
that they don't feel threatened, or they don't feel like this is not something I can relate to, or it's not something that I understand. But suddenly, when it's a potato telling the story, like it's like it's like whether you're 5 years old or like 50, like it's gonna strike a chord.
Exactly. And it's also less scary to hear that story than when it's from a human being preaching at you.
Right.
So yeah, it really makes it more approachable.
Yeah.
And I mean that ties in so well to the disability community as well. I think one of the reasons I'm able to be such an effective disability advocate is because I am viewed as a rather unthreatening presence, as a well, I pass as a white, um, disabled, wheelchair using woman who is petite. And I can stand up and walk on certain days. So there are days I can walk into the room and nobody will see my disability at all. So people aren't afraid of that because they can understand it. And they'll let me have a voice, where a lot of other individuals would not.
Right.
So that gives me power and gives me a chance to speak up when others wouldn't be able to. So I really feel it's important
Well,
that I
thank
can
you for
tell those
acknowledging
stories that. Pardon?
thank you for acknowledging that power, because I think that's really important too, is like knowing when you do have a say, and knowing when you do have power, and acknowledging
Mhm.
that, like
Yes,
like
certainly.
for me, like my sister tells me this all the time. She says, you're non-binary, but you present as male, and that comes with privilege. And
Mhm.
she's absolutely right, and I have to acknowledge that privilege, because it's something that's handed to me whether I like it or not.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, for many years for me in the disability community, well, at first I'd fight the label of disabled because that means I'm less than and not powerful. And once I found that power in my disability label, it gave me this extra level of, okay, now I have to use this. Now I really have to, yeah, use the voice that I've been given and the platform that I've been given to speak up and make people comfortable with my disability so that I can then be at the table and have
Right.
a voice
Right.
for all of those who can't speak for themselves.
Well, and that also leads into the idea of of appropriating or reappropriating words that have been used to put people down, whether it's disabled or the B word or the N word. Like these are things that, that people, certain communities have now reappropriated or said, you know what, this was used to take us down. We're now gonna change that narrative. We're reclaiming it. You know.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's a lot of controversy around that still, and even I have a lot of conversations about it within my wheelchair using community, or wheelies as we typically call ourselves. Um, but some people are very, very sensitive to being called a cripple. Others will use that as a powerful thing that they've reclaimed. For me, particularly for myself, I see GIMP as a positive. It means that you're doing it well and really having a voice and speaking up. Um,
What does that
but
mean?
other people,
What does that mean? Sorry, I don't know what that means.
yeah, for me, the word GIMP, it typically would mean somebody who a part of their body does not function properly, and they're seen as an invalid and incapable. But it's really a word that some in the disability community have reclaimed and taken pride in, and made it mean that you're an advocate and that you're really speaking up and using your voice in the disability community. And others would completely disagree on with me on that. But yeah, it's interesting in the same way as the queer label. For years, I would not connect that label to myself because I didn't feel I had earned it enough as a, again, passing straight woman. Um, but yeah, over time, I realized that no, I can connect this to the identity that I need it to be, and take the good and leave behind what doesn't fit for me in that identity and really make it my own. So yeah,
Yes.
I'm now very proud to say that I'm a queer disabled woman. But for many years, that was really difficult to attach those labels to myself. Yeah. And I think it's an evolving conversation that will continue to change both in the disability community and in all communities. It's how do we find that proper language for ourselves? And even the word disability in and of itself, I have many friends that would have diagnoses that people would call them disabled, but have no connection to the word whatsoever and would never attribute it to themselves. Um, and and that's wonderful for them. For me, I use it more to find a sense of community and not to assign any value or any characteristics to myself, but I use it to find my community and find
Right.
people who have commonalities to me. So it's really become a strength in that sense.
Right. And speaking of invisible disabilities, like for example, if somebody's deaf, or or if someone has vision loss, or these are the kinds of things that are not so obvious, but but also like need to be acknowledged and need to be thought about. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, those issues are sometimes swept under the rug because it's like, you know because it's not as plain, it's not as plainly visible, I guess.
Yeah, and it's not as well understood either, I don't think, in the world of invisible disability. Um, People like to be able to read things immediately when they walk in the room and like to feel that they have an understanding. So I think it's much more difficult for them with the world of invisible disabilities just to not be able to make those snap judgments that make them feel safe and make them feel secure in that they feel they understand what's happening in that body. um, but yeah, there's such a wide range of disability out there, and so many that even myself, as somebody who's lived in the disability community for 17 years, am just starting to discover and understand. There's still so much out there, but I think we really need to start looking at all disabilities as having value and not just kind of the trendy ones as well. As a wheelchair using woman, I mean, that is what people think of when they think of disability, is the blue placard with the wheelchair on it. But there's so much more that needs to be done, and so much more that we need to do as a community to fight for each other's rights as well. um, just in recent years, I've been working more to discover what it's like for somebody who's blind or low vision, or deaf or hard of hearing, and what their experience is like, and how I can work to help them more. Um, and done some really interesting research into wayfinding and how to make spaces more accessible in that way. And all of these things help so many different people that don't even identify as having disabilities, that we really need to start looking at all these things as just ways to make everybody's life easier. Um, and yeah, really need to fight for more of that happening in the community. And just understanding somebody's experience when they tell you that they're going through something, don't fight them on it. You don't have to argue whether they have a disability or not. You don't have to argue whether they should have access or not. Just trust their experience, and let them have that,
Right.
and ask how you can support them in it.
Well, that's, I'm really happy that you said that, because you're right. There are people that are gatekeepery. Even in the queer community, even in the disabled community, there's people who, sort of say, "Oh, well, you're not the right kind of disabled. You're not the right kind of queer." And I'm like, who the hell are you to say? Who are you to make that judgment, right? Like, we all have our experiences, and like we have to respect that, that diversity, and that like you said, that all those nuances that come with having those experiences.
Yeah, there's definitely not a lot of nuance there, and yeah, still so much gatekeeping going on, and so much judgment of who belongs and who
Right.
doesn't.
Like
Yeah.
like like for example, if you're asexual, then a lot of people will say, "Oh, you're not part of the queer community." But it's like, you know, I think that's so unfortunate.
Hmm. Yeah, it is really unfortunate, and we all lose out by making those judgments as well, because we don't get to know the other side of things, and we don't get to have these interesting conversations with other people about what their experience is. And that's really what makes life interesting, at least for me it does.
I agree. I
Yeah.
100% agree with you. Um, and I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you what kind of literature, or what kind of poetry, or what kind of music resonates with you. Like, because you seem to have an incredibly eclectic taste in theater. So I'm assuming like your taste in all the other artistic forms is probably also eclectic.
Yeah, I definitely have a very eclectic taste in everything. I'm kind of drawn all over the place, in all my tastes. And even when people ask me about my experience in past jobs, and it's all over the place. I like to experience life, and to me, it changes from one day to the next, and I'm always drawn in different directions. So yeah, lately I've been on a really big kick literature wise of amazing disabled femme authors.
Hmm.
So I've been reading a lot of that lately. But yeah, it's a little bit of everywhere, and it kind of changes from day to day, and is very tied to my mood, and what I'm interested in. Yeah, so it's all over the place and very varied for sure.
And do you think this is another slightly controversial issue that I wanted to bring up? Do you think nudity and or partial nudity has a place in theater? And or allowing people to to express themselves, in this way.
Yeah, I think it definitely has a place in theater. Um, I think that the human body is so interesting and so diverse again. Um,
And needs
and
to be
our
celebrated.
society is really, pardon?
And needs to be celebrated.
It really does. Yeah. And the diversity of it needs to be celebrated for sure. Yeah, our culture has created this strange taboo that this body is okay and this one isn't, or this
Yes,
part of the body is okay and this
that's
one
right.
isn't.
And like
And
and the
to me,
sexualization of the body. where like,
You're,
like a woman breastfeeding and people are like, oh, that's inappropriate, but tits on a billboard, hey, that's great, why not? And I'm like, so, these are the kinds of issues that really bother me.
yes, certainly. Yeah. And I mean, I've really connected over the years to, I've been involved in a lot of theater that's been involved, well, not just theater, just art in general, that's been involved in the idea of sex and disability, which again is very taboo. As individuals with especially mobility disabilities, but all disabilities, we're very much infantilized and shown to not be sexual beings, and it's not okay to have a relationship with a person with a disability because then you're taking advantage of them, which myself as a poly person with a disability is pretty ridiculous. And I've gotten it all the time that I'm out with another partner, doing something very innocent, like a few weeks ago, holding hands in a cafe. We're both in our 30s, and had somebody go by and say, "Oh, isn't that so cute?" It's like, who would say that to two able-bodied adults? It just would not happen.
Right.
But because of the wheelchair, it's then acceptable. But yeah, I think there really needs to be more of that put out in the arts in general. Of this is my body and this is what I'm proud of. And for me personally, my body has put me through some really horrible things, but also being able to work through that and really be proud of what it can do now, is really, really important and something I want to show off. And something I want to show off the differences of how I present my body and how that is shaped through the lens of disability, is something that's very, very important to me. And I think if we can show more of that on stage, it will destigmatize disability a lot. Um,
Agreed.
my last circus piece that I did, I opened it by coming out on stage in my wheelchair and saying, "This is your invitation to look at me, study my body, ask all of your questions, see all of me." And then I stood up out of the chair, and that's the moment that people are not expecting. And then I go do this awesome circus show and move around in ways people don't think a wheelchair user can. But that's how I want to use my art, is to challenge people's perceptions
I
and
love that.
challenge how they think my body should look and how it should behave. And yeah, I really like having those moments where we can just all be humans and be on an equal and level playing field and have the chance to explore each other's experience. Um, yeah, so there's all kinds of different sides of that and spectrums of that that I like to explore.
Yeah. So
But
it's
it all
like
comes
it's
down.
leveling the playing field, like, sort of
Yes.
a more egalitarian approach.
Yeah, it all comes down to challenging the perceptions that are out there. And I think our bodies are both a very provocative way of doing that, but also in some ways a very safe way of doing that, because we all have a body and
Yes.
we all, yeah, it equalizes us in a lot of different ways as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mhm.
And the other thing is like what we wear, like the sartorial elements, like as somebody who has a disability, like, the clothes that you wear also, can be a very, a provocative thing, or like something that will raise questions.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, and it's something that in the last decade or so I've really connected to as a woman with a disability, is challenging those stereotypes of what I'm allowed to wear. Um, and again, showing off, more of my sexual side in that, whether it's a tight corset or whether it's a long ball gown, which are not supposed to be shown in a wheelchair. Yeah, and also from my queer perspective of wearing more masculine clothing and
Hmm.
presenting myself in other ways like that that people don't expect. Um, I shaved my head last year for the first time and felt the sexiest and strongest and most feminine that I've ever felt in a very traditionally masculine presenting haircut.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's to play with those elements of what society tells us
Like,
should be happening.
like, there's this character in Black Panther. She's a warrior. She has her like, she's bald, and and
Hmm.
and it's like, a lot of people would see that as masculine, but I actually kind of saw it as a beautiful presentation of femininity, because it was like, it was like, it was like really interesting. And a lot of people say, oh, if you're bald, you must have no choice, you must be going through cancer. But there's people who do this as like a conscious, as a fashion statement even. And
Yeah,
I think that's so powerful.
yeah. And for me, when I had thought about shaving my head for years, and it was something I really wanted to do. But what stopped me for so many years was, as a disabled woman, I was very, very conscious of the fact that people would read me as sick if I was bald and in a wheelchair. And that stopped me for many years. And then when I did it, I realized, no, this makes me feel so much stronger and healthier and more myself. But it is really, yeah, it can be this choice of hyper femininity, like you said, and really this beautiful thing. And yeah, I really like celebrating. I have many them or female or non-binary presenting friends that have been rocking the bald look lately, and it's a look that I love and find very sexy and beautiful, and I hope more people will start embracing it as well. Yeah,
Well, hey, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate, your ability to be so candid and so real about these issues, you know.
certainly. Thank you so much for having me. And I realized just now going in that I didn't do a proper introduction of myself either for the blind and low vision audience, which is something I'm still getting used to on Zoom calls. So I'll do that now. Um, my name is April Hubbard. I'm a light skinned Caucasian woman with short brown hair. I'm wearing glasses and a black top. And I have masks behind me in the background and a floral pillow. So this is one thing I'm still getting used to, and I hope that more individuals out there will start doing these intros as well. Um, yeah, because I think it's a really important thing, especially in this world of technology that we're living in now, that everybody's included and everybody gets
Yes.
to experience.
Well, thank
Now
you
that
so
our
much.
world exists in the world of technology, we need to be more conscious of that and make sure everybody can access it.
Totally,
And
yeah.
feel
And
free
that,
to.
and being cognizant of that is not even like, I have low vision, but I had never seen this done before. The first time that I saw this done was just a couple of days ago. I was on a workshop where we're talking about disability in the community arts practice, and that was the first time that somebody did that. So this is literally the second time somebody's ever done that. And I'm just like, this is blowing my mind, like, that I never thought about this, and that it never came up, because, especially because I do have a vision disability. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for bringing this up as something that we all need to think about, and moving
And
forward.
also, don't forget your image descriptions and alt text on all of your social media posts, folks. They're very important. So, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, go search it out. It's really interesting and really important to do. Got to get the disability advocacy in there every chance I get.
Well, I can't wait to see you perform live. I'd love to see you do, either your circus thing, your theater thing. Yeah, I'm, and maybe, I mean, maybe we can do like a collaboration. I would be honored, like, to collaborate with you in some way.
I would love that. My art is going in a lot of interesting and different ways now, and I would love to find a way to collaborate with you. So we'll definitely talk more about that. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I'm really glad that we had a chance to talk today, and I'll let you know as soon as it's uploaded. I'll send you a link.
Great. Thanks so much.
Okay,
Have a
bye.
good day. Bye.